So, what is the take out of all of what has been covered so far? What is the point that you want our viewers, especially the Muslims, to gain out of this? I want you to be the one to articulate it.
Yeah, so if we think about it, Muhammad originally comes from a word which meant precious, and it got associated with the chosen one. It very much was a messianic title. Christians for centuries believed that it was another way of referring to Jesus, and the Jews used that term to refer to from their point of view, the yet to come Messiah. So what seems to have happened is that the Muslims are borrowing from the Jewish and Christian traditions. They're taking that term, which meant Messiah, and they're mutating the meaning, which was originally a title, and confusing it and treating it as if it was a name for a person. And I think that's a historic mistake that that has happened, probably through ignorance over the centuries, because they got disconnected from the biblical origin of the name or the title.
That is true. And of course, there is a title from Muhammad al-Mustafa that shows it one. I would argue that this is what Jesus was called in the first place. And I'm not surprised that, excuse me, that the Muslims are now trying to find a way to apply it to their prophet. I mean, it's the issue of legitimacy. That's all what's going on. You want to use something that is popular, known, so that you can apply it to a person that you are trying to promote as if he is the legitimate one. Is that a good assessment?
Absolutely. I think how it happened was a gradual transition from Muhammad, Jesus, to Muhammad, the Arabian prophet, and they took along a lot of the other terms for Jesus and applied it to Muhammad. And then there was confusion in the ranks because a lot of these terms actually indicate that Jesus is divine, and obviously there's definitely one pathway there in Islamic tradition that doesn't want to claim that Muhammad is divine, and yet there's also that other tradition that seems to hint at Muhammad being divine, and that's a problem for them. And I think that kind of echoes the roots of these terms.
Absolutely. I think next time we are going to talk about the instances where Muhammad was used in coins and inscriptions. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. So we're going to look at the very first inscription using the word Mahmed, and we're also going to look at its use in coins as well. So it's going to be quite an interesting one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this exciting topic. And thank you everyone for watching this audio from God Back.
It's great to be back. So I think it's fine that we know what the meaning of Mahmed back 3,000 years ago, but what was the meaning in the 6th century and the 7th century, which are the key periods? So we're actually going to look at an inscription which was found, I believe, in the last 10 years or so, which comes from the 6th century, way down in Yemen. And it actually offers us an insight into the meaning at that time. So this is dated to 523 AD. It's a dedication stele commemorating the conquest of the Christian city of Nadra'an by the Jewish king Yusuf of Himyar, and this contains praises to their God for their victory. And notice the object of the term is the Jewish God, as we'll see. So here are various images of the inscriptions. If you look at the bottom left hand side, there's a red line there, and actually in Sabaic, the Sabaic script, we have the term Mahmed. But what did it mean? So here it is. Rab had the Mahmed, and apologies, I'm not sure how you pronounce Sabaic, but we have the translation. By the Lord of Jews, by the highly praised. Clearly, the highly praised, or Mahmed, refers to God. It's used above God. It's a divine adjective, as it were. It seems likely that Christians borrowed the phrase for God, the highly praised Mahmed, and used it for Jesus, or God, in the 7th century, as we'll see in just a moment. But you can see down the bottom of this slide the Sabaic term Mahmed there in this big script. Okay, so this is a really important insight. So Jews were using this term, and obviously what has happened is the Jews have had an influence on Christians. They're interacting with Christians, and the word has entered into Christian usage. It was still relatively rare to see the term Mahmed used among Christians, but yet it was used. And in the 7th century, then we have various coins appearing. Mahmed here refers to Jesus, I would argue, the praised or desired one. These coins reflect a Christian rather than a Muslim milieu, still in the 7th century. This coin here that we see is from 686 or 687 AD. And if we look under the M, we see the word Mahmed there. Over the M, we see a cross, and you can also see another cross on the left-hand side. I've seen so many attempts to explain away why crosses are on the coins with Mahmed or Muhammad. You could argue, well, the Muslims were being really tolerant, but that's really kind of been bending over backwards to try and explain away what should be quite obvious, that this is a Christian term here for Jesus. So it's a synonym. And as we saw in the last episode, it's a synonym referring to Jesus as the Messiah. Okay?
Well, I mean, I like this
And if you,
explanation that Muslims were tolerant. It's almost like the Muslims today are shooting themselves in the foot and saying, our predecessors were tolerant, but we're no longer tolerant. Somehow they decided that they don't want to be tolerant anymore.
yeah, very different from. So whichever way they take it, they're shooting themselves in the foot there. Now that's one example, but let's have another example here. This one is credit to Odin LaFontaine. You can see very clearly in this one, not just one or two, but I see about 4 crosses there, and clearly Mahmed is there. So if you think it's just a coincidence, I would argue there's multiple crosses here, and it's referring to Mahmed here, which I again would argue is really referring to Jesus. This is a Christian coin.
In this context now, what is the meaning of the word, for instance? Is it referring to a person or an adjectival use here of the person?
I would say it probably has the meaning of highly praised, and who's been highly praised, I would suggest it's Jesus that's being referred to. And the evidence for that is the crosses. If it was the Muhammad of the Islamic tradition, I would expect that instead of crosses, we would have like a star and crescent moon instead of the crosses, but that isn't what we have. We have, it's a Christian usage, and it basically follows on from earlier Christian coins. The only additional term is Mahmed, which started to be added to the coins in the 660s. Probably it's become popularized in relation to Messiah. And again, we have this one here. It's from Beth Shehan, or Sheehan, which is in Palestine or Israel. And I don't know if people can make that out, but there's actually a fish symbol there, which is an obvious symbol for Christians, and underneath again is Mahmed. So I think it's pretty clear from my take anyway. Maybe I'm biased here, but I think it's pretty clear that this is used about Jesus and not about an Arabian prophet. And it just requires Muslims, I think, maybe to think beyond the standard narrative that's been taught to actually see what's actually happening here. We saw that Jews were using Mahmed in the 6th century to mean highly praised, but in that case, they were using it for God. Here, Christians are just taking that term and using it for Jesus, who obviously Christians believe is both human and God. So if it's a divine adjective, as it were, it fits for Jesus as well from a Christian point of view.
Wonderful. It's definitely clear here. I mean, just the use of the fish alone and the association with Christianity one way or another. To say that Muhammad somehow decided to use Christian symbols to put his name, or Muslims, early Muslims, Caliphate, for instance, or caliphs, decided to use Christian symbols to put the name of an Islamic prophet, where the same Islamic prophet allegedly attacked both Christians and Jews, it makes no sense whatsoever at all.
Yeah, and I would add as well, if you look at the transition that happened under Abd al-Malik, he originally had coins like this, and then he removed all images. So obviously we can see during his reign a gradual transition, an evolution during his term. And obviously a lot of people believe that it was he who put together the Quran from various sources, and then that meaning for Mahmed probably changed over the coming decades to what became later.
Yeah, I mean,
so I think all of this makes sense.
Yeah, you can see the evidence of a development versus something that was set in stone and still accepted this tension between a cross and the name of Muhammad. A development and an evolution, I would take that, basically something gradual was taking place, which supports everything that we've been talking about lately about this origin of Islam and the historical development as opposed to what we call the standard Islamic narrative. Is that, what do you say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of Muslims today imagine that Islam as they know it today was like that back in the 640s or 650s, but actually most of what they know as Islam took centuries and centuries to develop. All the different traditions, all the different hadiths and so forth, all the different understandings are gradually added over the centuries. It didn't come pre-packaged in the 7th century. It took a long time. And really the first shoots of Islam was to be seen in the 8th century. They had to first get rid of Jesus from their focus and then introduce an Arabian prophet. And that's really where things changed from then onwards. But if you look at when the first appearance of a biography of Muhammad, you're really talking about the 8th or 9th century when you see the first seerahs to do with an Arabian prophet appearing. Why did it take 200 years for a seerah to appear? Well, it's obvious to me now, looking at it, that you can't have the seerah if there is no Arabian prophet in the 7th century.
That's right.
You need a transition. You need a transition first. Once they have the idea that this Mahmed is an Arabian prophet, then they have to go back and come up with a story. And it became a bit like Chinese whispers. Stories got developed. Things got put into the mouth of this Arabian prophet. And eventually a whole narrative got generated. So that's my understanding at this moment in time.
Yes, sir. In the next 30 seconds, set the stage for next time. What are we talking about? Something about Muawiya and the Maronites.
Yeah, so there is a 7th century source that refers to Mahmud's throne in relation to Muawiya. Now, this could be viewed as, this is contrary evidence to what we've just said, but we're going to look at it afresh with new eyes and see actually it still confirms what we've just said in terms of Mahmud being in relation to Jesus. That's in the next episode.
Thank you so much, everybody. Well, hello, everyone. This is our body, and we want to welcome all of you back to a continuation of the video series that we're doing with Mel concerning the origin of the name Muhammad. Today, we are going to take yet another deeper look at how the name Muhammad was used. And with that in mind, we welcome Brother Bill to elaborate further on other usages of that term. Mel, thank you so much for everything that you've shared so far, and we're eager to hear from you about today's basically focus.
Well, it's great to be back. So today we're going to be looking at the use of a cross on an inscription by Muawiya, who Islamic tradition would probably paint as a Muslim. It looks very much like he was a Christian, or at least very sympathetic to Christianity. Maybe he was a Christian heretic, but it looks very much like he's a Christian, as we'll see. We have a very interesting 7th century source called the Maronite Chronicle, and it does seem to refer to Mahmud's throne. And I used to think that maybe he's referring to either Medina or Mecca, but when I looked into it, it seems that that isn't the case, and we're still on solid ground in relation to Mahmud being a reference to Jesus. So, without further ado, let's take a look at Muawiya's inscription. So we can see here at the beginning of the inscription, there's a clear cross at the beginning, and it refers to Muawiya as Muaviya, okay, which I believe is Greek. Most of this is written in Greek, and some of the Arabic terms have been transliterated for us. So we have Muawiya, servant of God, and Amir al-Mu'minin, commander of the believers. Now, at first glance, you might think, there's evidence that of Islam, but actually, Abdul Allah and Abdul Mu'minin are very generic. There's nothing specifically Islamic about those. Servant of God could be used by Christians as much as Muslims. Commander of the believers, again, is very vague. There's nothing particularly specific there. If we look at this dispassionately, this would would suggest that Muawiya was a Christian. Why would he have a cross at the beginning? Doesn't have to. So the other thing to point out as well is that Muawiya seems to have borrowed the name from a previous Arab ruler called Muaviya, and she was a Christian as well. So I would argue that it looks like he was a Christian, but there's also other evidence, as we'll see in a moment, from the Maronite Chronicle that supports this impression that he's a Christian. So the Maronite Chronicle was written a few years after the story that is referring to is written in 664 and is referring to 660, so it's contemporary, so a very good source. It says many Arabs gathered at Jerusalem and made Muawiya king. Notice he was made king in Jerusalem, not Mecca, not Medina, and he went up and sat down on Golgotha. He prayed there and went to Gethsemane and went down to the tomb of the Blessed Mary to pray in it. Look at all the important Christian sites: Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified; Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed before the day he was crucified; and also the tomb of Jesus' mother. All of those things, if you were looking at it without any other context, you would have to assume that we're talking about a Christian here and not a Muslim. It also goes on to say he placed his throne in Damascus and refused to go to Mahmud's throne. Now, the puzzle comes with the reference to Mahmud's throne. This could possibly mean he refused to rule from Jerusalem, Mahmud's throne. He was made king in Jerusalem, but he chose to rule from Damascus, and that's the interpretation I'm going to suggest for this. But how does Jesus have a throne in Jerusalem? In what sense? Now, I'm going to argue that when Jesus was crucified, his cross was his throne, and there's a bit of mystical theology involved in this that would have been easy for a 7th century Christian to get, but unfortunately we've lost that sense. So it took a little bit of investigation to recover that meaning. Before we go forward, Alan, do you want to comment on any of that?
I mean, just fascinating to me that we find someone by the name Muawiya. I grew up believing he was one of the caliphs for basically the Umayyads, and he's the founder of the Umayyad dynasty, and yet he is actually using a cross, and he's associated with a queen and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it's very hard to see how the standard Islamic narrative fits with these early sources. Like, these are really early contemporary sources.
Yeah, these are inscriptions, real inscriptions, real documentations, right?
Yeah. this is not someone's interpretation centuries later who've never met Muawiya and assume that he's a Muslim. This is actually people who lived in his time. So let's investigate this Mahmud's throne, because actually this is the key thing. We need to see, is it referring to Jesus here, or is it referring to an Arabian prophet? So let's investigate. Under the terms of the Old Covenant, the mercy seat was the top of the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant, you can see the box there, that is the Ark of the Covenant. And it represented the place where the invisible God sat to dispense mercy to his sinful people. Okay, so you imagine God sat on that seat and then gave his mercy to his people. So I hope that makes sense. So in a sense, if that's God's mercy seat, you could also say it's God's throne. Okay? Now for Christians believe Jesus is God, so therefore this would be Mahmud's throne, if Mahmud means the Messiah or Jesus. Okay? Now, if we look at Leviticus 16:2, the key bit there, tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover.
Since the declaration.
So the high priest made atonement at the mercy seat, and this should be familiar to many viewers, I'm sure. Only the high priest could enter the most holy place and approach the mercy seat, and only once a year to make atonement